Welcome to the How to Succeed podcast, the show that helps you get to the top and stay there. This is how to succeed at helping buyers make a business case. The following podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, Inc. and protected by U.S. copyright laws. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. You can subscribe to this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and check out our additional resources at sandler.com. I'm your host, Mike Montague, Director of Community Engagement at Sandler, and my guest this week is Clint Babcock, longtime Sandler trainer from Tampa and author of Negotiating from the Inside Out for Sandler. We're going to talk with him about how to succeed at making a business case. Clint, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a little bit about helping buyers make a business case and why that's important for us.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Great to be back. So as sales professionals, one of the things that I constantly hear from the owners of companies and the president CEOs is, I wish my folks had an owner's mindset. So I think in order to make a business case, we have to know more and more about business, and we've got to really understand that owner's mindset, that the way that they make decisions and go about that has to be a little bit laid out, collaborative, and it's absolutely has to make sense. And that as salespeople, sometimes we get caught up in our own products and services and don't think, would I do this? Would I buy this product and services from me? And that leads us down to being able to start to develop that business case.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. One, in Sandler, we focus a lot on pain, and pain is great. David Sandler said people buy emotionally, they only rationalize their decisions intellectually. Right. But I think sometimes we forget the second part of that rule, which is they still have to rationalize their decision intellectually. It has to make an ROI case. And then I think for people that are not Sandler trained, sometimes we just kind of say, oh, it's a great ROI, or we've helped so many other clients that we assume the buyers know that if they spend $100,000 with us, they're going to make $1 million, or they're going to save, $500,000. And sometimes we don't do a really good job of making that blatantly obvious for somebody who hasn't ever bought this before, or somebody who hasn't bought from us before, and they can't really believe it. So when we think about attitude here, what are some ideal attitudes the salesperson should have when thinking about the business case?
Yeah, I'll mention a couple. One is curiosity with skepticism. Curiosity with skepticism. All right, so I've got to be curious enough to dive in and understand the business from two standpoints: strategic. What's happening? How would this impact their organization strategically? Which simplified just means this: long term, over the next year or 2 or 3 or 4 years. How does this fit within their organization in that way? And through the curiosity of asking those questions from a strategic standpoint is one. And then secondly, then understanding tactically and technically, how does this fit within their organization and what's it going to do for them from an ROI standpoint, and how are they going to use this to run their business? And the skepticism part, Mike, this is the toughest thing. We mentioned, and we've heard happy ears. We get excited. It's funny because I was doing a session the other day, and I'm like, hey, should we ever be excited on a sales call? During the discovery process, and I threw myself on the bus. I said, you don't understand, man. When I hear somebody say something that's like a good pain inside of me, I start to get warm. I start to like it, right? And that's a little bit of that version of excitement that comes in, but we gotta hold that down. And the skepticism side of me always says, this sounds good, but I don't know. This sounds great. Wow, I'm liking what I'm hearing. They're giving me some pain. I can't put a smile on my face. I got to back it off a little bit and go, wait a second, what's really happening here? Would they really need this? And I got to get that mental shift to them proving to me that this is something they need for their business versus me trying to prove it to them.
Yeah, I think, Tim Roberts comes to mind, or Sandler trainer from Indianapolis. He always talks about the proof and making a case and finding the truth. And I think that's really where it clicked for me. I'm glad that you highlighted the skepticism, because I think we do take their word for it, that they're like, oh, this is $100,000 problem, or oh, it's definitely a good deal for us, or we're going to make this much money on it. And we don't really inspect that. Or sometimes they just say, oh yeah, that budget shouldn't be a problem. And we don't even inspect the fact that they're not making any money out. This is something, maybe one person wants, but not everybody else. Or, the boss has to see that they're going to actually increase their profits with this, right?
Right. Well, which it's amazing how the linkages of the different things that we have to do during the discovery process, pain, budget, and decision, how they are all intertwined and linked together. Because as you're going through that pain part or that discovery part, now you all of a sudden got to say, well, wait a second, let me immediately switch into decision mode, decision step, right? The how part has to be interwoven within there. And hey, how does this organization go about making a decision to buy a product or service? And part of that, if that question's not asked, the part that you will miss will be, hey, Mike, just send me a proposal and let me run it up the ladder, right? Well, you don't know what the ladder looks like. You don't know how far that goes. And there's a lot of steps on that ladder. Who are those people in there that we've got to uncover? But I think one of the biggest missteps in most B2B sales professionals is the how. How does your organization take on a project, a solution like this? And what are the steps in that process so that we can understand that and if necessarily negotiate through that? Is it a proof of concept that they're going to be looking for? Is it going to be a trial, a demo? And the criteria that has to be matched up in order to go down that path.
I think that's brilliant. And we've kind of already moved into behavior here a little bit. But what I heard that I think people miss a lot is sometimes you're convincing somebody who has to convince somebody else too. So there's a lot of rehearsal that has to be done. And man, how many deals have been lost where somebody got excited in purchasing or an end user, and then the CFO looks at the numbers and is like, no, we're not doing that. And proving to somebody else who isn't as emotionally involved or doesn't have those same pains is difficult. I feel a lot of times like the CEO or the CFO can come in and be like, oh yeah, it might be a pain for you, but it's not for me. And so I don't have to justify it at the same level. So what can you recommend that salespeople do? I think you've already kind of talked about it, about inspecting it, finding out. But once we realize maybe that there is going to have to be a business case justification, especially in like an enterprise sale, what should we be doing?
Okay. It's now you gotta, Mike, this is the tough part. We got to access the part of most salespeople that probably isn't their best skill set, and that's documentation in the form of a mutual action plan. So depending upon your sales cycle, some of you that are listening to this are in a shorter sales cycle. Maybe it's not such a huge document, but others of you are in enterprise, longer term sales cycles where you are going to have multiple levels, multiple decision makers. We've got to have what's called a mutual action plan that is a shared document of the conversations, the meetings, the pains, the issues, the challenges, everything that starts at the beginning of this plan and then works our way all the way through. That is a, hey, are we on the same page document? So 4 months down the line, when the economic buyer, the CFO now enters in, he or she has been already updated and delivered this mutual action plan of the 8 other meetings and conversations and actions that have taken place over that previous 4 months, that now all of a sudden brings that person up on the story that has happened. All too often what happens is that person comes in and now I've got to try to bring that person up to speed on the conversations and the historical review of everything that's transpired over that period of time, and I'll miss something. I'm not going to get everything right. Their team isn't going to get everything right. And so that mutual action plan is the documented shared process that's going to make sure every step along the way has engagement, has the action items, has what needed to be done, has the ROI, has things that give us the roadmap that's going to help us as we get deeper into the sales cycle.
I think that's really great. And it brings me, since you're the negotiation guy for Sandler and you literally wrote the book, I'm wondering what other aspects besides like the direct price or cost needs to be included in that document. So I'm thinking, sometimes people don't count their lost sales. So they're thinking, oh, we would have had this, or sometimes that's an estimate, or they're not counting the employee turnover because people are quitting because the software is too complicated or something. And there's a lot of other things that might be negotiated in this business case besides direct, return on investment in dollars. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think by having a mutual action plan like this, you are still selling, and you're going to help reduce any kind of negotiations at the end, because it's a lot of the insight and information that you're gathering along the way to build that business case with their fingerprints on it. It should be 70, 80% their insight and their information, and only 20, 30% of yours, because by the time they're done with this, by the time you're done, it's their fingerprints on this mutual action plan that helps them build the business case internally, because they built it, we didn't.
Yeah, so, and that's where I was going to go.
Right, Mike? If they have ownership, why would they negotiate against something that they help build and want, and it makes good business?
Yeah, it reminds me of one of our good rules. People don't argue with their own data. That, if they put it in there, that's the truth. And you can even double check, like, hey, I'm going to send this final proposal over. Are these numbers still right, or have they changed since we talked about them? And get them to verify that business case before you even lock it in, I think is great. I wanted to give you one more shot at techniques. I feel like we've hinted on a bunch of them, but getting them to say that, I think, could be challenging. So there's got to be some questionings here. I also heard, the document and the plan. What else comes to mind when you think of technique?
Yeah. So with a lot of my clients, they use the POC, the proof of concept, or a trial or a demo through that. So, so from a technique standpoint, one of the things that ends up happening is, hey, that's a really good, we call it pivot points. A pivot point is if you can drive a prospect and help a prospect towards doing something, it increases your close rate exponentially. And a POC or a trial, a demo, is one of those aspects that we want people to do. And if they do it, we know our close percentage goes up. So it could be an assessment. It could be an on-site meeting. It could be inviting people into your office. If I can get somebody to leave their chair and come into our office, or if I can get multiple people on a Zoom that, that otherwise I couldn't have, those are great pivot points. So with this, here's when you got proof of concept or a demo, the two big mistakes that are made are success criteria are not determined. And that's number one. And then the second is scheduled periodic updates and conversations. It could be 15 minutes over that period of time of the POC, because some POCs are shorter than others. Some trials, demos are shorter than others. Some are longer, but we've got to define those criteria ahead of time so that we know at the end, hey, if this works out the way and we hit our success criteria, now we've got a built-in business case that's going to be able to support the other documentation that we have.
I think that's really good. I know there's a lot of different ways to do a proof of concept. In general, do you have any more advice like that? I'm thinking shorter is generally better. We need to know what we're measuring, but then I'm always leery of proof of concept because sometimes it's not the real thing, or there may be a cost to implementation that doesn't exactly scale. So you have to consider that in your business case, that sometimes there's, starting costs that are higher, but the business case gets better the longer you use the product or service.
Yeah. Now you're getting down into the industry, right? Some industries, hey, it's a path that they're taking. They're not going to buy their software. They're not going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in multiple years of engagement unless they do a POC, because the people that need to do that within that organization have to be able to turn around to their superiors and be able to say, yes, we've tested it. We've had it in our environment and it works. But to your point, Mike, think about it. Proof of concept. All it's trying to do is just, hey, does it do what you said it's going to do? So I do think sometimes there's probably a case that it's overdone, that hey, let's just keep this tight. You have a week to turn this around, just to this is just to make sure that this is going to do what we said it's going to do. And I think too often we over-engineer stuff, and if we keep it tight, I think we have a better chance of saying, hey, look, you only need 4 or 5 days to be able to do this. Here's the 6 things that you need to do those. Let's talk on Friday, and you can give me thumbs up, thumbs down. Do we keep moving forward or not?
Yeah. And a couple of other things came to mind for me there, is that like social proof can be powerful. So testimonials, the case studies, here's the results, the proven ROI that one of our other clients had, can help them make a business case or think about some things maybe that they weren't thinking about in their case. The other one I think is, we kind of skipped over the demos a little bit too. If you can walk them through it, what we're really talking about is proving to them with beyond a shadow of a doubt that they don't need to take a leap of faith with us, that by signing this contract, it's confirming the stuff that we already know to be true. And I think, whether that's in the sales process or in the product or service that we're selling, that's important, that we need to lower those psychological jumps and leaps they have to make throughout the sales process, right?
No doubt. And so think about, depends on the industry. We got a lot of different industries listening. So a technology industry, for example, who's doing the demos? A lot of times it's a sales engineer, or it's a product engineer, or it's somebody that has the skill set. It's no different. They have to be able to speak business as well. They know the bits and bytes, and they know the dots and the dashes, but can they turn around and be able to put it into a business environment and ask the question? So whenever I get an opportunity to train sales engineers or solutions architects or design engineers, people are going to probably write me bad emails, but they're my favorite clients. Why? Because they get process. They really get process. They're very structured. And all I got to do is teach them how to ask better questions, and they can close deals better than anybody else can, because they already have the the product knowledge. They already have that down. So getting them to think business mindedness through that trial or that demo, now all of a sudden they are absolutely lethal in getting those people thinking about how this is going to be able to impact their business.
Those are great. And we have a whole nother podcast on how to succeed with trials and demos, but I wanted to highlight your point a little bit. It's a funny question that I think leaders need to ask themselves, is like, is it easier to teach a engineer how to ask good questions, or to teach a salesperson the technical skills that they need to do it, or to stop talking? Sometimes those challenges can be more difficult, but other times not. If you have a talented sales team that's nurturing and prepared to ask questions and really loves their product or service, then that's the way to go and keep the technical stuff out of those conversations. But great conversation with you here today, Clint. Again, we're talking with Clint Babcock, longtime Sandler trainer from Tampa and Florida, and author of Negotiating from the Inside Out. So we've been on the podcast several times. I think I've already asked you all my cheesy job interview questions, but if this is somebody's first time hearing you, I wanted to take a second to talk about your book. So you want to give us a quick 30-second commercial and see if it's right for anybody that's listening today?
Yeah, sure. Here's a question that I ask when I'm talking to a brand new prospect myself is, hey, over the past year, how much of margins have been negotiated out of your deals over the past year? And the second thing is whenever I'm in front of a new sales team, I'll say, hey, how many of you have previously gone through a sales training course of some kind? And if I'm in front of 20, 30 people, odds are at least 70, 80% of the hands are going to go up. They've gone through something, either internally with the company or externally. Then I'll ask the same question. How many of you have ever gone through any negotiations training, a course or what have you? Predominantly less than 10% ever had. And that's why the book, I think, is so important, is no different than selling. There's systems, there's techniques to it. And what the book really highlights is a system and techniques of negotiations. Because if you go into negotiations and you don't have a system to follow, the buyers do, and you're going to end up falling prey to their system. And I think the book really outlines what is the buyer, what's their process, what's their system, what are their gambits. We call it the deal makers dozens. What are the moves that they do? And then, which they're going to do, and so do we when we're going to buy something. What's our process and what's our system to make sure that we, A, can recognize that, and B, we know exactly where we're going to go when they start to negotiate.
Awesome. And I love quotes. So do you have a favorite like quote, motto, or mantra that we should keep in mind?
Yeah, biggest thing is the title of the book was created after I wrote the book. Didn't have a title, didn't, and such. And afterwards, as I really looked at it, negotiate from the inside out, meaning you better know how you're wired as a negotiator. Do you enjoy it? Do you not? Do you look at it as conflict and therefore you want to avoid it? So my big mantra is negotiate from the inside out.
I like it. All right, Clint, let's wrap it up for everybody on helping buyers make a business case. What is one attitude you'd like people to have?
Owner's mindset. Be an owner of the business. And if you have that owner's mindset, you'll be able to put yourself on the other side of the table with your prospect, hand in hand with them, getting the fingerprints on the solution.
And one key behavior or action item to do?
Practice. You've got to practice this, and you also have to look at the industries you work in and build the personas and build the case studies ahead of time, so that when you are in going through that process, you already know, hey, I know what that business case is going to be. I just need to lead them and get them there.
And finally, the best technique to use.
Yeah, mutual action plans. Get your mutual action plans down. They've got to have their fingerprints on the proposal. When you eventually do it, it should be basically everything you discovered through them. It's their proposal, not your proposal.
That's Clint Babcock, Sandler trainer from Tampa. And for more information on Sandler, you can get any of our free resources or find a training location at sandler.com. As always, you can subscribe or leave us a review for this podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember to share this with somebody that needs to hear it. So whether that's a salesperson on your team or somebody that you know as a colleague, if you found this helpful, share it with somebody else. Thank you for listening. And remember, whatever you are, be a good one. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training with over 200 locations. For more information, visit sandler.com.
The Sandler Summit returns